Hey guys, thanks for joining me in this speed paint. This time I'll be painting Elide Lochan from Throne of Glass. If you want to watch this without the voiceover, you can head over to the channel and there's just some nice music playing in the background instead of my voice. But how I started was just with a sketch of this lovely lady, and I picked a specific scene. If you haven't read the books, I won't spoil anything, but it's just, I had a specific one in mind, so I didn't, I knew I was getting it right. And in the sketch, I ended up changing a lot of things from start to finish, so the initial stages weren't exactly what I decided to keep. I also, as you can see, had a hard time deciding like where certain things would go, where things were positioned, and what clothing she was wearing, which I think I ended up liking. The whole cloak idea and the corset, because it just seemed like something somebody in that time would wear. And I was reshaping her head there because I knew just it wasn't right, and then I start to pull up some references, and I did trace the hair, but then I tweaked it so much that it basically became completely different from the reference I used in the first place. I was trying to get placement here, and that failed dramatically, so I just started from scratch, which I should have done in the first place. And then the sketch doesn't really encompass didn't encompass what I was trying to have seen, so I kind of tried to I don't know, I messed with it a bunch and for hours and hours, and it didn't work, so it's easier to see what I'm trying to do in the final version. But then I was watching some videos on how to shade, and I started here, but this obviously was my first time, so it was just not happening for me. And then I just had too much of just the wrong tone entirely, and I didn't know how to get the shading right at all. So then I just did more research afterwards and decided to restart, which was not a bad decision. And I even, on this second try, I started with too much of a yellowy tone and ended up fixing that a little bit later. But I also didn't exactly know where my light source was, where it was coming from, so I'll do better with that next time. But there you can see I added more of a pinky tone, as I should have from the start. And as I went through with each of the facial features, I just erased it from a duplicate of the line art and just tweaked it as I went to accommodate the newly added facial features. And I also just kind of did all of the skin at the same time. As you can see, it was way earlier, but it just, I don't know, it was a really fun learning process, and I liked the fact that I didn't have to use line art as I usually did to be in the final edition of my drawing, and you could still see each detail nicely just from shading, which is ultimately where I want to get to with my style. And so I think I found it after a long time of searching through anime or just full-on cartoon or realism. I think I like this for digital drawing, so I'll be doing more of these. for a little bit here, it looks like I'm not really doing anything, but I'm shading and really going into detail with the lips to make sure I get the right depth and dimensions in the lips with the highlighting, tints and shading and all that, because I've struggled in the past with getting the lips to look like a part of the face rather than they're just stuck on top. So that's what I was focusing on here, and in a minute I will start on the eyes. Right now she looks a little bit scary, but I was really focusing on the edges and making sure that without the line art they didn't look, nothing blended into anything else and looked depthless or either too blended or too harsh. With the eyes, I really struggled on them at first, and making them not look super glassy or popping out too much, getting them to look in the right direction, because of her 3/4 perspective was difficult for me, but I ended up hopefully getting it right to look like they're actual 3-dimensional objects. So then after a little bit, I started on the eyelashes, and yes, I did use stamps. I'm still practicing on getting the right eyelashes, because they can be a little bit tricky, but I still messed with them enough that it wasn't just copying, hopefully. Then I ended up figuring out a way to make the eyes not look as attention grabbing. I just overall darkened them and made them look a little bit more in their place, so they're not popping out of her head like before. And mainly detail work here with the tear ducts and eyelids. The shading in the hair was really similar to the skin, in the sense that I just blocked off the area that I was doing, and so I could color fill, and then ended up using just a huge array of brushes to get the right texture that I wanted towards the end, and really focused on getting those sections of the hair so it didn't look completely flat. And as I started, I wanted her hair to be closer to onyx, is what it describes in the book, but I accidentally made it a little bit too light, which I ended up being okay with in the end, but I would have preferred it to be black. And you can see that it starts to develop some. I tried to keep the same tones in, but I added more highlights and shading, and then tried to make the hair look a part of her head rather than just a sticker on top. So that's what I was focusing on, and I messed up the forehead but fixed it later, so I understand how that looks right now. But as I continued, I just used some brushes to texture her hair and added some baby hairs along the outer rim so it looked more realistic. As I went on, I started paying more attention to the piece as a whole rather than the individual properties of her face and each strand of hair, which overall helped it, because initially I'd been working too far into the detail and into the pixels, honestly. But it ended up okay, because I started standing a little back a little bit further, metaphorically. But I don't know, I think the hair turned out okay overall. I do have to say the clothing was definitely a process. It took quite a while, just in that she had so many different pieces and I had so many layers, and from the cloak to the blouse to the corset to the skirt, and the lace had its own section, and the it just all was a little bit confusing, but I managed through it and ended up getting not that bad of a piece. By now I've started to find a light source, which I probably should have done from the beginning, to make it look a bit less flat, but it started to develop some perspective, like stylistic perspective choices, if that makes sense. And I was able to kind of go without the line art and still be able to understand what was going on, and I just made sure that was more clear throughout the shading process, and was one of the trickiest parts, probably, without making it look too cartoonish, because I wanted to err on the side of realism. So this was really just a learning experience for me, and my style changed over the course of each hour that I took to do it. And as I do it more often and just practice, I will hopefully see more of a style come through and learn how to be consistent with the overall appearance. But for my first one, it wasn't too bad. And this is about the end, so I decided to try to find a background, and I'd say it worked overall pretty well. So thank you for watching, and come back later.